The chapel froze when my mother's voice cut through the air. "You changed your name." Polished wood gleamed beneath the soft glow of hanging lights, the scent of lilies hanging thick in the air. Every pew was filled, yet the silence that followed her words felt heavier than any sermon. Faces turned toward me, some shocked, some appraising, some quietly furious. My calm, deliberate gaze met theirs, unflinching. Father's jaw tightened, a subtle tremor of disbelief that barely hid his fury. Vivian's eyes widened, the disbelief written in every line of her face, while Brendan's lips parted in stunned silence. The program lay open in my hands, black letters stark against white. Evelyn Morrison. It wasn't a typo. It wasn't a mistake. It was a declaration. An empty chair at the front row bore a small sign. Family. The chair's vacancy was deliberate, and so was mine. I let my eyes linger on it, letting the symbolism sink in. They were present in body but absent in understanding, absent in acceptance, absent in whatever love they thought they were owed. "You think a name changes who I am?" I said, voice steady, carrying through the quiet chapel. "It doesn't. It only finally tells the truth." Whispers fluttered like birds around the room, but I remained rooted. In that moment, I felt a subtle shift inside me, a quiet strengthening of a part they'd never truly known. They thought today's silence exposed me. They had no idea it was exposing them. I took a deep breath, letting the fragrance of lilies and polished wood anchor me. My mother's glare could not pierce the armor I'd built around my identity. I had arrived at this funeral not as the child who once shrank in corners, whose voice was always second best, but as someone claiming space without apology. The service continued, muted in my awareness, as family murmurs buzzed like a low, uneasy hum. Yet all I could think was the name printed boldly on the program, the empty chair that mirrored their emotional absence, and the unspoken truth they had finally been forced to confront. "Tio, understand why I was here with a new name and no regrets. You need to know where I started. In a house where noise meant importance, and importance never belonged to me, I grew up learning how to shrink myself between louder lives. The Austen house was a theater of hierarchies where noise meant importance. Every click of my mother's heels carried meaning. Urgent clacks for Brendan, soft, approving taps for Vivian, and silence, suffocating and complete for me. That silence taught me more than words ever could. My presence was optional, my voice unnecessary, my achievements invisible. I was 12 when Vivian had her big art show. She stood before her work, radiant and expecting praise. I, meanwhile, held her jacket in one hand, a crumpled certificate from a regional science competition pressed into my pocket. No one had come for me. My mother's gaze skimmed past, her soft tone reserved for Vivian, and a whisper of, "Don't be dramatic, Evelyn," brushed past me as though my success was a rumor. That night, I learned that triumph measured itself not in effort, but in who noticed it. High school graduation was no different. My family arrived late, an empty chair where my name should have been. Brendan had been at a lake party, Vivian delayed by some trivial errand, and my parents stopped for coffee on the way, muttering apologies as if their tardiness excused years of absence. I walked across the stage to quiet applause, the only claps coming from strangers, while my parents' smiles finally found me in passing snapshots. Too little, too late. Rice University should have been different. Weeks of reminders went unanswered. My parents replied with heart emojis and casual, "We'll try" texts. On award day, I sat alone on the dorm steps with takeout in one hand and an unopened envelope in the other, my hard-earned recognition sealed in cardboard and neglect. My quiet protests had been absorbed by habit. I learned the choreography of invisibility so well that even my loneliness felt like the expected norm. "Don't be dramatic, Evelyn," became a refrain that accompanied birthdays, holidays, even ordinary evenings. Each year I became quieter, softer, smaller. Complaints were pointless, attention was fleeting, and love was conditional. By the time I left for college, the echoes of my childhood had turned me into someone who could vanish into a room without anyone noticing. And for a long time I preferred it that way. But every silence, every overlooked victory, every empty chair built a foundation of understanding beneath my calm exterior. I learned patience, observation, and the ability to measure who deserved my energy. I learned where my worth resided, quietly, undeniably, and eventually independently. The last flashback that stayed with me, stuck like a splinter, was the ceremony that changed everything. The one where I finally learned my place wasn't at the edge of their lives. It was outside them entirely. The shift didn't happen in one moment. It built slowly, like pressure behind a door I'd kept closed for years. But the day it finally cracked was ordinary, quiet, deceptively normal. 8 months before my dissertation defense, I sent formal announcements, mailed invitations, texts, even a group chat message, to everyone who mattered. Well, who I thought mattered. Responses trickled in. So proud, sweetheart. A solitary thumbs-up emoji, a nice that felt more casual than congratulatory. I reminded them again at every Sunday dinner. 5 months out, 3 months, 6 weeks, 2 weeks. Each repetition eroded hope, but I persisted, stubborn in my belief that presence mattered more than excuses. Then came February. Brendan posted a spring barbecue invitation online. April 22nd, 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. My defense. 3 p.m. that same day. Called him. "What time is your thing again?" he asked, genuinely confused, despite 20 reminders over the months. My mother's laugh floated in the background, dismissive, cruelly casual. "Don't be dramatic. We'll work something out." The night before my defense, I imagined their presence, even if it would be reluctant. My mother was at Brendan's, helping with setup, her voice cheerful in a distracted promise. "We'll be there." I tucked my exhaustion into a quiet corner, hoping, praying that some fragment of acknowledgement would survive their divided attention. April 22nd arrived with brutal clarity. I paced my apartment before leaving, heart steady but anxious, anticipating faces that might never appear. My phone buzzed mid-morning. "Where are you?" "We're all at Brendan's." My fingers hovered over the screen, but I didn't reply. The silence on my end was deliberate, heavy, final. 8 years of research, late nights, sacrifices, and solitary victories were about to be defended to a room missing 5 familiar faces, the people who had taught me invisibility as a skill rather than a consequence. The defense itself was meticulous, precise, deliberate. I articulated my findings, answered questions with confidence, and navigated the room like someone who had long practiced being seen by strangers but unseen by kin. When the committee finally spoke, their words carried weight, not absence. "Congratulations, Dr. Evelyn Brennan." The ache in that acknowledgement was familiar, almost quiet, yet it resonated deeper than any parental clap ever could. As I left the room, diploma in hand, the echoes of past neglect pressed around me. This was not just a graduation, it was a reckoning. Years of overlooked achievements, empty chairs, and soft dismissals had culminated in a single truth. My family's absence no longer defined my presence. That night, while messages from my family stacked unanswered on my screen, I sat alone in my apartment and opened my laptop. I created a folder titled Transition. No emotions, no hesitation. Just a folder. And the first step toward a life they would no longer have access to. It wasn't revenge. It was ordered. I opened the folder labeled Transition for the first time, its empty digital canvas holding the promise of structure and control. The printer hummed softly as I downloaded the legal name change petition, crisp pages sliding out like deliberate steps toward autonomy. Each requirement I highlighted with steady, unshaking pen strokes, mapping the process as meticulously as I once mapped my disappointments. Spreadsheets followed. Old names, new names, accounts to update, subscriptions to sever. Each line of text, each tab, a quiet declaration of sovereignty. The next morning I dressed deliberately. A navy blouse pressed perfectly against slacks, shoes clean and precise. Driving to the courthouse, the world outside my windshield seemed muted, neutral, ready to be observed without judgment. Filling out the forms line by line, Evelyn Morrison settled into each blank space like it belonged there, like it had always been waiting. The clerk glanced at the papers, glanced back at me. "Processing takes a few weeks," they said. He nodded. "That's fine." Outside, the sun was different, clearer, less like something I had to earn, more like a witness to the life I was claiming. Back at the apartment, digital life became a parallel of the physical. New email addresses, fresh cloud drives, archived messages carefully stored and organized. Only Ruth's folder remained. Photos, letters, birthday greetings, the remnants of a connection I wanted to preserve. Everything else could fade. Packing the apartment was methodical, almost ritualistic. Boxes filled the living room, each sealed with care. Calls and texts went unanswered. Distractions dissolved into silence. Threads I had tried to keep from unraveling now unraveled on their own. Each step of the way I reminded myself, this was not dramatics, not revenge. It was intentional, precise, and necessary. 2 days later, I drove toward Portland, each mile shedding the weight of old expectations, the residue of silences that had defined me. The road stretched before me like a clean page, and behind me, threads dissolved into memory. I felt neither guilt nor sorrow, just quiet, deliberate liberation. When the truck pulled away carrying everything I owned toward Portland, I locked the apartment door and rested my hand on the cool metal for a moment. Not sentiment, just stillness. And ahead of me, a city where silence didn't feel like a punishment, but a way of breathing. Portland greeted me with gray skies and a soft drizzle. Perfect, I thought. The small apartment I rented had a balcony that overlooked a quiet, tree-lined street. The soft patter of rain against the glass became a rhythm I could lean into. Above my desk, a photo of my grandmother Ruth smiled down at me, a reminder of someone who had always believed I deserved space to exist, unjudged and unmeasured. Starting my new job in environmental consulting was another layer of relief. My colleagues welcomed me warmly, curious about my work, not my family, not the siblings I had spent years being compared to. There was a strange, unfamiliar steadiness in my chest, a rhythm that wasn't tethered to anyone else's approval. Each morning, I arrived with intention, coffee in hand, ready to navigate the day on my own terms. Evenings became rituals of precision. I updated my driver's license, voter registration, medical records, and emergency contacts. The last bank account linked to my old identity was closed, folded into my new life. Each task brought its own small sound, the tap of keys, the click of a button, the soft rip of an envelope. Not dramatic, not triumphant, but precise, controlled. Mind. Weeks passed, and a notification appeared. Your name change petition has been approved. I printed the confirmation and filed it neatly into my identity folder. There was no celebration, no announcement, only the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed. And the evenings, I would stand on the balcony, watching the drizzle pool on the leaves below, listening to a city that moved without expectation. I didn't announce it. I didn't message anyone. I just lived. And in that living I found a rhythm, a peace, a sense of being fully myself without apology or compromise. The transformation wasn't loud. It wasn't a spectacle. It was living with intention, with autonomy, with a quiet insistence that my presence and absence mattered in ways they could not have measured. Silence, I learned, has a way of echoing, especially when people expect noise. And my family was about to discover just how loud my absence could be. Silence has a way of echoing when people expect noise. IT started small. An HR email flagged an attempt to access my emergency contact information. Old numbers were disconnected, profiles marked as unverified. Apartment management returned a voicemail from my family, seeking a forwarding address. Their words were polite, curious, hopeful. My reply was simple. No consent given. No forwarding information would be shared. Curiosity shifted to desperation the moment I powered on my old phone, long buried in a drawer. 83 missed calls from my mother. Dozens more from siblings. The voicemail box told the story in 3 acts. Confusion, panic, anger. Where are you? This isn't funny. You're blowing it out of proportion. You can't just vanish. This silence is childish. You owe us an explanation. Each message layered over the last like weight pressing against air that was finally mine. I listened once, twice, and then no more. I owed them nothing. Not an apology, not an update, not validation. I turned the phone off and placed it back in the drawer, where it would remain silent, ignored, powerless. The air felt lighter. Boundaries, once theoretical and tested, now solidified into tangible barriers. Every legal form, every carefully archived digital folder, every official confirmation of Evelyn Morrison functioning independently. These were not just documents. They were shields, structures that protected not only my name but my life, my autonomy, and the hard-won peace I had finally carved out for myself. The subtle power of paperwork became a daily reassurance. I could navigate the world knowing my family could reach me in none of the ways they used to. Their voices, once controlling and omnipresent, now dissolved into silence. Not accidental, but intentional. My absence was real, enforceable, and absolute. It was a quiet justice. A victory without confrontation, without drama, without spectacle. Theirs had been years of control, intrusion, and neglect. Mine was the calm authority of methodical detachment, proving that autonomy could be more resonant than any argument, louder than any shouting, and more unassailable than any guilt they tried to invoke. And then came the moment everything aligned. Great Aunt Ruth passed away, the one person who had ever truly seen me. I knew I had to go. Not for my family but for her. And when I did, they would finally understand what they'd lost. Their eyes flicked to the program, then to me, then back again. And I realized they finally saw me. Just too late. Outside the chapel, my mother's voice trembled with a mix of frustration and disbelief. This isn't fair. We made a mistake. Families move past things. I didn't flinch. Calm, measured, and steady, I met her gaze. You chose a barbecue over my doctorate. You didn't forget, you prioritized. Now the systems I exist in only recognize people who show up. You weren't listed. The rest handled itself. For the first time, the weight of paperwork, signatures, and boundaries became tangible to her. She opened her mouth to argue, but no guilt could penetrate the structures I had built. Legal, digital, emotional. Vivian's voice came next, quieter, hesitant. You didn't have to go this far. I shook my head gently. I didn't go far. I went where I was seen. Brendan remained silent, the echoes of old neglect finally settling in the empty spaces between his words. I drove away afterward, their shapes blurred through the windshield, reminders of a past life that could no longer reach me. They couldn't follow, not legally, not digitally, not emotionally. Months passed in Portland, and rhythms of my new life formed naturally. I brewed coffee in the small kitchen of my apartment, ran calculations for water reclamation models, and shared insights with colleagues who listened, not comparing me to siblings, not questioning my choices. Alex, in particular, had a patience I hadn't known I needed, and a willingness to hear what mattered without judgment. Evenings were spent on the balcony, rain tracing patterns along the railing, the city's soft gray tones comforting rather than oppressive. The memory of the empty chair in that chapel grew small, flat, tucked away like a photograph at the back of a drawer. I didn't hate them. Hatred required weight, and I no longer carried theirs. Every small routine, every quiet success reinforced a simple truth. I wasn't missing anymore. I had arrived. Boundaries weren't punishments. They were proof of where I learned to stand. My family spent years forgetting me in rooms I had worked hard to enter, so I built a life in a place where showing up wasn't optional. Now, when I sign my name, Evelyn Morrison, the silence that follows isn't empty. It's mine. Some doors stay closed simply because I no longer need what's behind them. If you've ever felt invisible in your own story, remember this. The name you answer to should belong to someone who shows up for you, even if that someone is just you.